Can I hear how you're doing? All right, that's better. Woo! Who's awake here this morning? You see, I need to live up to a reputation. So I've never started a conference before, so I'm very honored and privileged to be the first speaker this morning. I'm really excited to talk through some things, but I do have to deliver, you see, because one of the organizers, my good friend Piotr over there, said this on Twitter a couple of days ago. I'm going to have the first talk, and my talks apparently give more energy than coffee. and so I'm doing my best here, and I hope that's true. If I fail, there is coffee back there, and it is good. I have tasted and seen, my friends, and I love it. A little bit about me to start with. My name is Tejas. That's pronounced like contagious. Don't worry, I'm not contagious, right? I'm not going to give you anything besides hopefully a good talk. If English is your first language, this will be funny. It's just a bit of a learning device because my name's a little bit exotic. If English isn't your first language and my name's hard to pronounce, you're welcome to look in my general direction and just say stuff, and I'll try and understand that you're talking to me. I flew in here from Germany, where I work. I work for a company called Contiamo, and what we do is we help our customers turn data into decisions. I think that's the best way to put it. We work with like big sets of data and machine learning in order to help our customers figure out what to do with that. And this is relevant for the talk because we work on a front-end team that usually has to interact with other teams and other sets of data. So how do we do that in a way that scales and in a way that is efficient? Really high level, it sounds a little bit mystical, right? Ooh, data decisions. I think in its simplest form, if you're like calling customer support for one of our customers and they know you're calling for the 200th time and you're probably angry, they'll be able to be nicer to you and maybe offer you something for free based on our tools, right? That's kind of what we do. What we're going to talk about today is scalable best practices for your development team. Scalable best practices for your development team. I need to be very careful here in saying that the phrase best practices is phrasing that I'd like us not to get confused. So I don't know if these are the best. I don't know if I'm capable of giving a talk that says definitively, hey, this is the best. These are some things that I've learned working at Contiamo and at other companies that have kind of helped front-end teams. And so the goal is not to say, hey, this is the best, go do this right now. You won't regret it. This will change your life. Like I'm not giving you a clickbait talk. But I am hoping to impart some lessons, the results of some lessons that I've learned, some of which I've learned the hard way. And then the hope is that they'll be able to help you. But before we get into that, we should spend some time kind of talking about the problems we're trying to solve. We need to define the problem space that we're working in. And so we'll go ahead and do that. And the reason for this is because, they say common wisdom will tell you the first step to solving a problem is defining you have one. The problem space with software teams can be a little bit nuanced and variable depending on what you're building and your team structure, but there are some common themes that I've found that we'll look at. So this isn't a definitive list, this isn't an exhaustive list, but I think this is a good starting point. These themes have plagued some development teams that I've worked with, and I still see tenets of it throughout the software development landscape today. And so what we'll do is we'll walk through some of them, and then we'll talk about some potential solutions that have worked for us. I'll give you real-world examples of how, and talk about some value that they've added. Does that sound okay? You can use your voice. You have it for a reason. Now, let's walk through the first one, complexity. You see, we, as engineers, we work with code, and code can be complex, right? We have all kinds of complexities with a code base. We have algorithmic runtime complexity, which is expressed via something called asymptotic notation. It's how complex is your computation. And we usually see this in the case of, for example, an autocomplete component, right? For each character that a user enters in the input, if you depending on the calculations you do on it, that can get a little bit complex. It could be a linear complexity where for each character, you're doing a computation, and so the bigger the inputs, the more time it'll need to compute. We're all familiar with this. There's also cyclomatic complexity. There's how do you structure your files? What libraries do you use? Should you use certain tools? There's these complexities that we need to some degree, get right. There's also complexities on the team side. And I feel like we don't really talk about these very much, but I feel like they're an enormous amount more complex than anything we could have with computers. You know what I mean? Like, Berlin, where I live, is an incredibly diverse city. Like, I work for a German company in Germany. It is a GmbH and everything. And in the company, we have like 4 Germans, right? And so it's quite diverse. In fact, there's more colors in the rainbow where I work. I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. Code of conduct. But with that comes complexity. There's different backgrounds, there's different interpretations. Like, some dude once told me, hey, I have a problem with your implementation, and I almost cried, you know, because of something I heard from somewhere else. And so how do we manage this? You see, diversity is a beautiful thing, but I believe it needs to be managed in order to have the best possible performance. So how do we manage that? Number 2, burnout. How many of you have ever worked weekends without wanting to? Yeah, there's a few of us, huh? How many of you have ever worked maybe a little bit later or a lot later? You stayed at work longer. Now, without wanting to, right? This is a common problem that let's try and figure it out together, because honestly, there's more to life than code. I'm saying this at a code conference. I feel a little bit controversial, but like, there's family, there's friends, there's fitness, there's physical and mental health. There's a whole bunch of topics that sometimes we ignore, and I get it, right? Code is fun. Like, for me, nobody holds a gun to my head and says, hey, finish this. I enjoy it. Like, I literally recently spent 24 hours straight coding because I love it. But we need to figure out some type of balance. My friend Sarah Vieira has an excellent talk that she gave at AgentConf some time ago. It's about this idea that your brain doesn't have a fix flag. Kind of like if you've ever ran like ESLint, you'll use ESLint -- fix. Your brain doesn't have that, right? So she says mental health is quite important. I highly recommend taking a look at this. It aims to solve some of the problems we're talking about today. Number 4, scale. Does the same solution work for 3 people as well as for 300 people, right? Does your software serve its purpose when used by 1 person and 1 million people? How do things scale across the board? That's just on the code base level. What about your team? Do the same solutions and meetings and planning sessions, do they work the same with a team of 3 versus a team of 30? You see, I've noticed a phenomenon working in some teams. Like, the more senior engineers you have, it's like this paradox. The slower you happen to deliver software. And this is pure opinion. I haven't looked at statistics, but I've seen this happen. Do you know what I mean? Like, I feel like we just enjoy discussing in like meetings, and let's write a design doc. And these things are good, but sometimes you have to write code too, you know? And it's interesting. How do we solve that problem? And penultimately, it means second to last, is this idea of deferred essentials. Deferred, what does that mean? Now, we have essentials when we build software. Who agrees with me? Show me your hands. We have some essentials. Nobody agrees with me. Well, let me ask you this. Do you use Git? Yeah, okay. So if you use Git, Git is an essential, I would say, right? Like, if you don't use Git, it's going to be really hard to build your software with a team. Git is an essential. What other essentials can we think of? Probably some type of, say that again? SVN, sure. I think of things like Prettier. I think of things like linters. I think of some type of build configuration. We have these things, and they're essential, no? I think some essentials we can defer for later. I've seen this as well. And I've been, all of the things I'm pointing out, I've done myself. Yeah, I'm not standing here as someone who's better than everyone else. Like, I struggle with these things too. I'm tempted to often defer in what's the word? I'm instituting, there you go. I'm tempted to sometimes defer instituting like a CI/CD pipeline. You know, I just want to build my software. I sometimes will not bother with pull requests and just push to master directly. Now, these are essentials, and I think they add value, right? One essential in particular that I'd like to talk about is this. It's testing. testing. You see, I think testing is absolutely essential for software, but I'm guilty of, maybe we'll add that later. Right? Like especially if you're working in a team that is expected to be high velocity, you want to build software, you're like, yeah, okay, we can add tests later. No, this should make it work, man. Let me make it work. Make it work. You know? There's a way of building software, right? It's called make it work, make it right, make it fast. And I do this, but I keep forgetting that part of make it right means add tests. And so I don't do TDD. There's an excellent talk coming up about TDD with some live coding by my friend sitting right over there. There he is. Come to that talk. It's excellent. And I fully advocate TDD. I don't do TDD because I'm lazy. But it's an excellent approach in general. We need to talk a little bit about the purpose of testing. You see, we don't just test so that we can then go boast about our code coverage. Hey, how much code coverage do you have? 60%? Oh, man, I'm 90%. I'm a better engineer. That's not why we test, right? We also don't test implementation details. Like, those things can change. The goal, what we should test is behavior. Behavior. Does your app predictably do what it's meant to? Yeah? We don't test just for testing's sake. We test in order to make sure that our app will not break while adding, removing, or changing features. Simple as that. It helps us predict our app's stability. Now, a friend of mine, Guillermo Rock, has a quote, and he says this. He says, write tests, not too many, mostly integration. Write tests, not too many, mostly integration. And this, I think, is huge. It's something that we need to get like tattooed inside our chests. I'm kidding. Don't. A little bit too much. I kind of thought about it after I said it. But it's something we need to keep in mind. You see, because if you've spent some time testing, you may have seen. How many of you have seen this before? Right. This is the pyramid of tests, and what it suggests. I'm surprised that there were like just 5 hands up. It suggests that you need to have a related number of tests to the number of components in your application. Right? So, and also it suggests breaking down your app and your tests into smaller functions or units because they're relatively easy to test, hopefully. And also, it doesn't cost a lot. It doesn't cost a lot of time. It doesn't cost a lot of money. It's pretty straightforward. Integrations are a little bit harder to test, and so you want to test those, but maybe not so much as your individual functions. And finally, acceptance tests are also known as end-to-end tests. And those are a little bit hard to test. I mean, it's usability, yeah? You would use a tool like Cypress or something to test end-to-end, and they usually, especially on front-end applications, there's so many different paths a user can go down. To test all of those can get a little bit cumbersome. I think this document or this image may not be as relevant to front-end web development today, dare I say. And the reason for that is if you break your app down into units, they're probably like React components, right? Which are just pure functions of your state. And so if I test a button in isolation, and I test a card in isolation, maybe I test an autocomplete in isolation, there's some value there, but there's no guarantee that my app is going to integrate in a way that works and is going to deliver value to my users. And so this idea that Guillermo presents, right, tests, mostly integration, another friend of mine, Kenzie Dodds, took that idea and kind of augmented this diagram to form the testing trophy. And this document, this image, I think makes a lot of sense. I especially like that it factors in static analysis. How many of you work with static analysis? Yeah, it is a lifesaver. It is an absolute lifesaver. For us at Contiamo, everything we write is TypeScript. What is static analysis? That's just before you even execute any code, your language that you write in could be Elm, PureScript, TypeScript, ReasonML, or even just plain old JavaScript with Flow. It'll analyze your code and see if you're trying to do something that maybe doesn't compute and will warn you, right? And that's a whole layer of safety. I can't remember the last time I've seen an NaN in JavaScript working with static analysis. So it factors in static analysis and does suggest unit testing, but really, as you can see, the chunk is integration, yeah? If things integrate, what does that mean? That means your app works. And so you still don't necessarily need to spend a lot of time on end-to-end, but mostly integrations are what you want to test because ultimately integrations are your application. And so finding a way to do that in a performant way is absolutely key. We've spent a lot of time talking about this because I do believe it is essential to good software. I really do, and I think it takes some time talking about it. That's all I'll say here. If you want to know more, I highly recommend Testing JavaScript by Kenzie Dodds. You can find it at testingjavascript.com. It is an invaluable resource and I'm convinced, will make you a better engineer. Now, all of these things, right? All of these things that we've talked about so far, burnout, deferred essentials, complexity, all of them, if not handled correctly, lead to a common theme that I've seen in multiple teams, and that theme is this, is technical debt. Now, I spend a lot of time at a lot of conferences talking to a lot of people in the community, and it's interesting because people seem divided about this idea. I'll say here, I love metaphor. Like, I'm a songwriter in my free time. I love poetry. I love metaphor. And I think this is an excellent metaphor. Why? Because, say, for example, I decide, you know what? I just want to go to New York City, concrete jungle where dreams are made of. There's nothing you can't do. And rent a Ferrari and just drive for like 5 weeks. And you know, get a helicopter tour of Manhattan, like go crazy and spend it all on my credit card. Like, at some point, when I come back, the bank is going to be like, hey, where's my money? And I'm going to be like, I'm sorry, I don't have it. And then they take my children. I'm kidding, they don't do that. I don't know how it works, but I could do how collateral is a whole thing. That's not the point. But there is a cost, right? There is a cost. You're getting away with nothing. Taking shortcuts can hurt. And I promise you, you will pay. Either your employer will pay with time or money, or you will pay with your mental health. You may work extra, or you may just go home at the end of a workday feeling like, yeah, I don't even believe in the code I'm writing. I'm not proud of this. And I've been there, and this is something we want to avoid. Now, I'm not saying technical debt should not exist at all, right? I have technical debt. But I'm saying I also spend money on my credit card. And I'm saying, not that it shouldn't exist, but it needs to be managed. Like, the moment you start to get worried about it, it's probably time to refactor. You know? I think a day or two refactoring never killed anyone, not to my knowledge at least. And so with that, I think we've clearly identified the problem space, right? We kind of know some of the tenets of what we're talking about. So let's move on to the possible proposed solutions. I need to be careful here because, again, I am not some thought leader who will solve all your problems. This is not a silver bullet. I'm sure there are teams like at the FANG, like Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, whatever, who have probably figured this stuff out. I haven't, and my goal is to say, this has helped me, maybe it will help you. Yeah? I would love to actually hear feedback. So I'm on Twitter at Tejas Kumar _. I'd love to, if you take this with you and try to implement it, let me know if it helps. Let me know what I should maybe delete, or let me know what I should talk about more. It would help me, and I hope it would help your team. There are roughly 5 or 6 ideas that we'll talk about. I hope we have enough time. If not, sorry. Let's just get right into it. There's a lot of content. Firstly, RDD. So we talked about TDD. How many of you have heard of BDD? Behavior-driven development. We tried this one time at a previous place, a team I worked in, and I found it really difficult, man. Maybe I don't have the skills, maybe I don't have the understanding. Actually, I'm quite sure I don't. But like, we worked with like gherkins and selenium, and it was a little bit confusing. And I was like, does development need to be so complicated? I'm not so sure. What we've done at Contiamo is we do this thing called RDD, so TDD, I don't want to spoil this talk, but test-driven development is where you write tests, and the tests fail because there's nothing, and then you write code that makes the tests pass. You develop against the test. We take that a step further, or a step before, and before we write any code whatsoever, tests or anything, we write Markdown. Like, we'll write a README. You see, at Contiamo, what we have is one product that we sell to our customers, but this product is a composition of, I think, 5 or 6 different standalone, separate products that different engineers own. Maybe in the future, different engineering teams will own. And we compose them nicely. The goal within the next few years is to make every one of those standalone products open source and free and public, right? But what we sell then is the way we marry the technology together. Does that make sense? So we sell the way we compose them together. Now, we were kind of nailing down requirements some time ago, and we decided, okay, so these are going to be separate applications, open source. But we need to make them look consistent. We need to make them look identical. And more than that, we need to make them behave in a way that is natural. And so what we ended up doing was we decided to start a design system or a UI component library. This is very similar to, I think, of semantic UI or material design. Like there's plenty of solutions out there, but we needed something more custom for us. We needed something that would really look a little bit like Excel, but slightly better, you know, for like operational in the numbers kind of UIs. And the solutions out there didn't quite meet our use cases. So we made this thing. It's public, it's free, it's open source. The goal is really to eat our own dog food, right? That's an industry term. It just means to use it ourselves, but maybe it helps someone else, so it's free there. And what we've done with operational UI is, like, when we want to add a feature or a component, we create a new issue on GitHub and kind of explain why should this exist, what this is, and then finally we'll write an API proposal. For us, API design is really, really important, and I'd highly recommend some type of RFC as a request for comments or design docs type solution at your team if you don't already have one. For us, this has served us really well because before we write any code, we think about the API. Once that's done, we'll move that over to a README. Now, there's a brilliant engineer. I highly recommend following him. His name is Artem Sapagin. He works at Wayfair. And he created a tool called React Style Guidist. And this thing is awesome. We use it. And it's kind of like MDX before MDX was a thing. And what React Style Guidist will do is it'll parse your markdown. And any JSX snippet in there, it will reference as a React component and give you like a live code playground. Right? So our README becomes our living documentation with the actual component. Now, if the component doesn't exist, that's going to fail, like a failing test. And so this is what we do. We write the README with the API, and then we develop against README. And that way, all of our engineers across the board know, okay, this is a new component, this is how it works, let's go implement it. And then they do it in the standalone applications, composes nicely into our single product. That was a huge learning for us, and I definitely advocate README-driven development to you today. Number 2, take the time. I think this is one of the most important things I'll say today. I've learned it's okay to stop. It's okay to breathe. You see, I think of software as kind of, I like metaphors. We've been over this. And so I think of the like building construction metaphor. And so if you're building software, I see it as you get in the zone. How many of you get in the zone? Right? Like you look at the clock, it's 12 o'clock. You finish coding, it's like 11 p.m., right? Like you've just coded for like so many hours and you didn't even notice. I get in the zone. And I see it as building a house. Like I'm building a house and I'm here and I'm laying brick on brick on brick, and then I'm laying my bricks and I'm really close, but then like 12 hours later, I zoom out and I'm like, oh my gosh, my house is sideways. Yeah. And now if I had stopped beforehand, I would have known, I need to adjust. It's okay. I would make the case that if you don't stop and reorient, you might actually produce worse software than if you did. Right? And the lie in the culture today is what? Is just keep working, do your best, try your hardest, get it done. No. I haven't heard a horror story from a company shutting down because someone took a break for 5 minutes. I'd say you also have this responsibility to your teammates. Yeah? If you're noticing someone's having a hard time, maybe the quality of the pull requests are coming down, and they may be a little bit frustrated, you can go to your teammate and say, hey, stop. Let's grab a coffee. Let's get some food. Let's talk through it. I guarantee you this has helped me in a very big way, just finding the right moment to say, whoa, stop. Number 3, how many of you have heard of this principle? This is the 0-1-N principle. It's kind of universal with software. The general idea, nice. The general idea is that you do things either 0 times, easy, Netflix, hi, or 1 time, but really, you probably shouldn't be doing anything more than that. That's literally the job of the computer. The machines work for us, right? We don't work for the machines yet. And so you want to do things 1 time. What does that mean practically? Well, I think in its most basic form is like repeating a string, right? Put that thing in a variable. very, very basic. But for us, we've had some interesting use cases here with some recurring tasks that automating them has done so much. Like it saved us time, it saved us money, but it also added skills to our engineers. And I'll share 2 stories from there. This icon here on the right, left. I'm on stage. I don't know. The pink one is a tool called Hygen. We had a use case at Contiamo to build an application that was quite sophisticated in terms of state. Yeah? State needed to be managed and transparent throughout the application. And so one of our engineers advocated, kind of just threw the decision in there, should we use Redux? How many of you use Redux? Yeah, wow, that's like everyone. Mark, if you're watching. Anyway, I think, yeah, Redux, I wasn't convinced that it was the use case for our job, for that project. This along the lines of you might not need Redux. I'm usually singing this song, we might not need Redux. And so I wasn't convinced. And another engineer actually brought up the point of, yeah, Redux is a little bit verbose. And I think that verbosity is a good thing. I think it helps you keep track of things in a very explicit way. But we had the case of, for each piece of our state, we would have to do things more than once. Yeah, we'd have to write a reducer and some type of asynchronous side effect, an epic or a thunk or a saga, whatever you have. And so we'd have to do something multiple times. And so it just didn't feel right. I don't know how else to say it. And so my friend, one of our engineers, his name is Fabian Bernard. He's a brilliant man. I'm really thankful to work with him. He suggested using this tool, Hygen. And it was amazing. We didn't end up using Redux, but what Hygen does is you give it a template of any number of files, and it'll ask you a few questions on the command line. You fill out a questionnaire once, and it spits out like n number of files for you. That delegated responsibility is something that adds a lot of value to teams in general. One more concrete use case that we had was we actually used Babel. How many of you use Babel? If you've used, yeah, the whole room. Wow, let's hear it for Babel actually. Oh my gosh, that is amazing. Now, if you use Babel, what's your most common use case? JSX, probably, right? If you're writing React, it's to turn a JSX pragma or a less than sign into react.createElement. I knew in theory that's what Babel does, and I've used it like that for years. Until I went to work one morning, and Fabian sits to my left. Fabian says, "Hey, did you know that Glamorous was deprecated?" You see, Glamorous is a library that we used with operational UI. We decided to use a CSS in JS type solution because what really helped us was co-locating styling code with structure code. Yeah, so we were able to have our structure of our UI described with JSX, and the style of that same component described with JavaScript object notation, or JSON. And Glamorous would process that and kind of marry them together. So we used this library for a year, and it was awesome. We had over 100 components, I think, at this time. And Fabian says to me, "Hey, this thing that's at the core of everything we're doing, by the way, it's deprecated. It's no longer supported." And I was like, "Oh, come on, stop, you're messing with me. Clearly, who would deprecate that? Our entire business model depends on this." "Well, no one would do that." "What?" Went on GitHub. There was one issue. It was from the author. He was like, "Oh, by the way, there's a better library. Go use that. This thing, I'm not maintaining this anymore." Like, what? So I was like, "Oh man, that sucks." Now, thankfully, the APIs were similar. Yeah, they were very similar, but we would have had to do a lot of work. We had a lot of components that I would have to go in and like by hand change them. That's more than one. Yeah, I could do a directory replace. If I was like Russian hacker level with regular expressions, I might be able to like, I'm not. But instead, I remembered, wait a second, Babel. What does Babel do? It transpiles. It transforms and transpiles. So if Babel can transform my code, could Babel help? Now, Jamie Kyle is one of the contributors to Babel and just an absolute gift to the front-end community. He has a handbook for Babel that is so valuable. I read this thing, and it makes Babel super accessible to the point where I read it and spent a couple days kind of just playing around with Babel. I exposed the abstract syntax tree of our component library, and it seemed to work. And so what I ended up doing was I wrote a transform that would take glamorous code as input, output this newer library called emotion style code, and I ran it. So I ran it once on our code base, and like within under a minute, our entire thing was just magically this new library. That was absolutely a great experience for us. So in trying to automate that recurring task, I had learned how to be better at code mods, right? I've learned how ASTs work, and it was an opportunity to learn, but it also saved Contiamo some time and money. What automated tasks, what recurring tasks rather, do you have in your team that you might be able to automate? What are you doing more than one time? That may be something to think about. Number 4, divide and conquer. Now, I'm Indian. I do not mean what the British did to my country. Don't do that. But what I do mean is isolate your responsibilities and solve them. So this comes out of a team that I worked with before Contiamo. Berlin is incredibly competitive. Like, it's really hard to find front-end engineers. Usually people have jobs and they're happily employed, so it's really hard to like get them. But also, you know, the term front-end engineer is quite abstract, right? Like, does it mean he enjoys Node.js? Does it mean she enjoys more of the system style back end for the front end? Does it mean someone enjoys styling? What does that mean? And so we had, at this place where I worked, we had a very interesting use case. We had a dual function. Number 1 was we would build a single page application that we would use internally. And number 2 was we would build and maintain a series of marketing pages. These pages needed to be optimized for conversion. They needed to be lead generation pages. They needed to be performant. They needed to be pixel perfect because our designer was an artist. And so our requirements became very clear to us. And what we ended up doing was we ended up dividing the roles into, rather dividing by function. And so instead of just looking for a generic front-end engineer, we got a little bit more specialized. We're looking for a styling expert. We're looking for a SaaS ninja. I really find the phrasing ninja tacky. But we're looking for someone really good at styling. We're looking for someone really good at Node.js, server-side rendering, static-site generation, someone with maybe experience in Next.js. So we were able to break it down by function, and what we were able to do by that is hire the right people. Crazy, right? And they really knew their stuff. It was really hard to not produce good software at this point. People have asked, after I've given this talk, people have asked, okay, but what happens when your SaaS expert gets sick or goes on vacation? We also had 2 dedicated full stack engineers who were, of course, being full stack, you're not as specialized, but you can fill the gaps. So we had a really good workflow there. And on the side of this document, at the very end, is D3. And I put that on there because at Contiamo, maybe we haven't been as intentional about this, but it just so happened that way. See, with data science, you also have data visualization, which is a big part of data science. And we're privileged to have like a dedicated D3 data viz expert on our team. Like, her name is Imogen Mason. She is, like, I go to work every day and she blows my mind. She is a genius. Like, I'm so thankful that I get to work with her. It is absolutely incredible. Now, I understand that some of you work in startups and you may not have the resources to have a dedicated like cloud services team or tech ops team. At Contiamo, we actually have a team of DevOps engineers who are just brilliant. But maybe not all of us have that luxury. So for me in my personal projects, I often use this thing here, this company here called Zeit, and they're the cloud team I wish I had. Honestly, like they bring the cloud down. I literally just write now in my command line, and it's online. If you haven't heard them, I highly recommend Zeit. We're drawing towards the end of the talk. There's just a couple more things we need to discuss. Embrace structure. So we've talked about Git. What is Git? Structure. We've talked about testing. What is testing? Structure. A dictionary definition in one of the dictionaries defines structure as anything that allows you to develop in a consistent fashion that allows growth and change. Allows you to develop in a consistent fashion that allows growth and change. And this develop here is not necessarily only about software. Yeah? We added a layer of extra structure to our applications at Contiamo. You see, because since our product composes 5 different standalone applications, each engineer, when you start a new project, would have to do kind of the build configuration. Like you'd need to write a Webpack config. We use TypeScript, so you'd need TS config. We use prettier. You'd need to have a prettier configuration. And you hope you get lucky enough to be consistent with all the other applications, but maybe not. And in our case, it was maybe not. And so we ended up with some type of soup where someone was using Parcel to build the final bundle. Someone was using Webpack. Others was just like a straight up TypeScript compilation. It was a little bit fragmented. And this was a problem because if one person, if the engineer who owned that product was sick or on vacation and someone tried to work with it, there was more time they needed to get familiar with it, right? In my opinion, we talk about divide and conquer. In my opinion, developers should be able to develop what they need to develop without having to worry about kind of the tooling around it. And so for us, we created a scaffold, a boilerplate. We call it operational scripts, also open source and public. And what that does for us is we just kind of npm install it in a completely new project with just a package JSON. npm install it, and it kind of takes over. It doesn't really install React or anything like that. It's not coupled to a framework, but it takes care of all of the surrounding dev tooling. So we get TypeScript, we get Webpack, it just works. It overwrites your npm start. So after we install this, we just run npm start, we have a dev server. We run npm build, we have a production bundle. Like it just magically works. And this abstracts away that complexity from our engineers. So what are they able to do with all that extra time? Well, develop the product really, really well. It really works seriously well for us. I would encourage you, embrace structure. Think about what structural changes you can add or remove that would help you to build software in a consistent fashion while allowing growth and change. We're nearly wrapping up. I have one more point. In terms of hands-on concrete best practices, I'll try and move quickly here for time. I would encourage you to mind your to-dos. And I say this because we don't always have time to implement everything the way we want, and so we leave a comment to do this later, to do refactor that. And what we do usually is at Contiamo is at the end of the week, so at Friday, I will search the code base for to-dos, see if there's anything I can clean up, and clean it up. As well, you'd want to abstract away any state that's recurring. So for us in our single page applications, a lot of them did data fetching. And when you do data fetching, you have pieces of state that are kind of repeated everywhere. Data, am I loading? Do I have a request error? What is the request object? We had this piece of state kind of floating around everywhere, and in some cases, we handled loading states. In some cases, we didn't. In some cases, we handled errors and relayed them to the user, and in other cases, we didn't. It was a little bit fragmented. So what we did with that recurring state was we abstracted it away. We created a library that is, again, free and open source, but really for us. We love GraphQL. We haven't yet adopted GraphQL because we want to integrate with companies that have been around for 20, 30 years who also haven't yet integrated GraphQL. And so our goal there is integration with REST. That said, we love Apollo very much and the APIs that it exposes. And so we wanted to create a RESTful kind of version, and that's what we did. And so now we're able to have similar APIs while the state of request and that responsibility is dedicated and abstracted away. Final 2 points. Internationalize. Please internationalize. Like, we live in Europe, right? We live in Poland. So we have Polish, we have German, we have French, we have Russian, we have Armenian, we have English. We have so many languages right here, yet most of us just build software in like English. I don't see, and I'm guilty of this too. We have stuff at Contiamo that is just English without any structure for internationalization. It blows my mind. My coworker Fabian keeps pushing this button. He's like, hey, add internationalization. Hey, and I hate him for it. But he's right. He has a point. We need to think about that so it doesn't come back and bite us later. And finally, I'd like to talk about accessibility. Because if if there's one thing that I believe will drive the web platform forward, it is accessibility. If there's one thing that I believe we need to pay more attention to, it is accessibility. You see, things like color contrast, is it correct? Screen readers, can I navigate your application with a keyboard only? And I say this because I have a disability. Sometimes I cannot use my arms. And I really hope I would be able to use your application by pressing tab. If I can't, you need to optimize. And I think this is really important because ultimately every problem you're trying to solve is an accessibility problem. Every problem you're trying to solve is an accessibility problem. You want to get real broad, Contiamo makes data science more accessible to our customers. Facebook, through React, makes UI development more accessible to you. Yeah? It's really just accessibility all the way down. So if there's one thing I have you leaving here and thinking of, I want you to think about how can I make things more accessible to the next person. Does that make sense? How can I improve the accessibility of X, Y, or Z? Let's quickly review. And I mean review your software. So when things are finished, when they're working, when you have users, you'll want to have a way for users to give you feedback. For us at Contiamo, we actually have, in dev mode, we have a thing. Our users don't really know what it does, but they know when something goes wrong, click the thing. And that gives them a lot of information that I imagine makes no sense, but they send that to us, and we're able to immediately track down where something broke and what broke and fix it immediately. I can't remember the last time we had a bug that we didn't know how to track down. I'd recommend some type of feedback process because here's a statistic from Nielsen, market leaders in research. They say it takes 5 users to give you 90% of the feedback for your application. 5! You have access to 5 people, I'm pretty sure. They can test your application and give you 90% of the feedback that you need. And lastly, the question to ask yourself is, can your application evolve? What does that mean? Can it adapt to changes in environment? Can it adapt to different browsers? Can it adapt to different development, staging, production environments in a way that makes sense? Do you have source maps on dev? Maybe. I think being environmentally aware might make sense. My final point before I close it is, what is the point of all of this? What is the point of why do we write code? To me, code is about communication. Someone called JavaScript the lingua franca. That means the bridge language. I don't really care about writing clean code or the best code, whatever that even means. I want to write code that communicates to my users and to my team. Code is about communication. I think that communication has to be rooted in love. I think we need to love our jobs, and I want to leave you with an encouragement to love those around you, love your neighbor as yourself. Thank you so much. My name is Tejas Kumar. It's my honor to be here.